Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. We are so happy that you are sharing your lunch hour with us wherever you may be. My name is Lucie Lederhendler. I'm the curator at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. And before I bring up the 4 artists included in Lasting, I would like to take a pause to honor and acknowledge the territory on which the AGSM and Brandon University enact their work, which is the traditional shared territory of the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, Anishinaabeg people, and it is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. The artworks in the exhibition, furthermore, were created within the IshKaabatens Waasa Inaabateg Department of Visual Art, a name that means little smoke that goes far, signifying the department's commitment to spaces that consider the student body alongside pedagogy and Indigenous knowledges. Now, we'll go on a quick walk through the exhibition so you can see how the artworks engage with one another. Here we go. When I first began curating back in Montreal, I was part of a collective that hosted several residencies a year. So it would be 2 to 4 artists selected separately from one another, and they would come together and create in the same space for a few months. And these are my origins as a curator, sort of looking for creative collaboration by osmosis. And when we had our first meeting, the artists in Lasting and I, it came up that this is another one of the casualties of COVID. They had to build these great big series of work in relative isolation. But this is one of my favorite things about curating. It's knowing that everything has something in common with everything else. Just like knowing that that's something that's true about the world in general. That's where the title Lasting comes from, is that very topical idea of the awareness, I think, that we all share, that we're moving through a moment in history, and there's a helplessness to that. We want it so badly to be over, but by identifying it as history, we're ensuring that it's going to last forever. So here we go. As usual, we would love to hear what the audience is thinking and to answer any questions you might have. You can communicate with us through the comments in whichever platform you're watching this on, and we will get to all of them after all the artists have presented. The first artist who I'm going to bring up is Linda Aleta Tame. If she would come up on screen, because her painting is the first one that you would encounter in the exhibition. So now I will just pass the mic right along to her.
Okay, thank you, Lucie. Okay, are we there?
Okay, your screen sharing, you can just go full screen.
Okay.
With your PowerPoint.
Oh, my PowerPoint went out somewhere. Oh dear.
Oh, dear. That's
Just
okay,
a moment.
we can watch you do this.
Okay. There we go. Okay, and now just, okay, are we good?
Yeah, now we're perfect.
All right, sorry about that. Well, thank you very much, Lucie, and thank you to Anna, too, for putting this all together. And thank you to my fellow graduating students. I'm just so grateful to be able to work together with you. I want to start with this poem because it summarizes all the work that went into my thesis show, but also the work that I'm sharing here in Lasting. Jewels. Beauty is not lost in despair. Every brutal bite of circumstance or sting of flying words and every blow of loss that staggers is a jewel. After mourning, joy. After loss, gain. After weakness, strength. Gems from the shattered heart, diamonds, emeralds, pearls, and lapis lazuli. I wanted to begin just talking about this painting, although it doesn't appear in the physical show at the AGSM. It's called Pearl Heart. And the reason it's not in the show is because it became damaged in my home studio. And I did do a repair on it. Now I'm painting it over again, and it's becoming a different piece altogether. But it describes the metaphorical reference of the gemstone, the pearl, that went into this body of work. The red part in the middle represents the tender part of the flesh of an oyster, because a pearl is formed by layers of a substance the oyster secretes to protect itself from an irritant or and a parasite, some kind of intruder that has lodged itself between the flesh and the shell. So this is where this piece came from, and my whole body of work is based on kind of the isolation of grieving and going through difficulty, which I was doing that beforehand. Like, I guess I was actually almost finished my thesis work before our first lockdown last March in 2020. But I was still working in isolation all the time because I was going through some traumatic events in my family. And I had lost several family members in a very short time to death. And then I also lost members of my family to prison because of some terrible incidents that happened. I was working through that in isolation on my own, in my own heart. And it came out on my canvas. Usually faith drives my work. And I guess it did here too, in that, but in a different way, because I was in faith trying to find beauty in this whole process. And then when we locked down, well, then I was in physical isolation, but maybe it was an okay thing, because I was able to work through this whole process of what needed to be done inside my art. This was the first piece I began work on. It's a large piece, and I actually started putting acrylic paint on, and I couldn't get it right, so I'd wash it off, and it just kept layering that way, paint on and wash off. And the image itself, I suppose that represents me in the foreground, and I'm reaching for hope, which seems to be, I can't grasp it. It's just out of reach, or when I do reach it, it dissipates as I grab onto it. And so that was what this piece was about, that it was elusive. But I could see that a certain beauty was coming through the layers anyway, and I found that encouraging. In the middle of this emotional, weighty process, I needed to have a break from it. And so I said one day, I'm going to just paint, enjoy the process. I'm not going to think about my sorrows, and I'm not going to think about my thesis. I'm not going to think about anything. I'm just going to paint. And that's how this painting came to be. And I completely enjoyed it. It was a wonderful experience to paint it. And I got to enjoy this process I had found. Paint on and wash off. It's a minimal use of materials, and that kind of represented a calm that I was looking for as well. This piece was done long before my thesis work, but I wanted to include it for a couple of reasons, but maybe we'll discuss that a little bit afterward. Lost. This started out to be a painting of a woman in a white dress in a field of daisies with a sunrise in the distance. It was a perfectly cliched piece, and I was not able to get through it. I struggled and struggled until finally I realized the problem was that I wasn't really being sincere or authentic in what was coming out of my heart. I may have been wanting to paint something that was in the future or something that I hoped for, but it wasn't my reality in the moment. And the nature of my work comes from my heart and from my emotion. So I needed to be more authentic. And So eventually her dress came off, and I thought that was represented vulnerability. And again, I was able to use this process that I truly love, this layering, which was like the pearl, like our lives, like what happens in real life. And this too, though my work was done prior to the lockdown last year, and it represented my own isolations, here I can see the pandemic just represented again in most of these pieces. And this one in particular, we all sort of felt as though we were in limbo. Where are we going to land? And we are all experiencing this in our own little worlds, and yet somehow we're together, but we're apart. And I think the thing that kept bringing me solace and helping me realize this would someday be better was the presence of beauty, because I just seemed to find that everywhere, and it was a constant, even though other things were not as stable. And then I began to emerge. I began to come through the worst of all of it. I began to feel like I was finding my way. It was still foggy, but I was finding my way. And this figure just appeared in the work. I didn't plan her. She just suddenly was there during these processes. And I think I looked at her and I thought, well, maybe that's me coming through a difficult time. But maybe it's also a supernatural presence, someone who's come along beside me and said, you know, you're not alone. Of course, I never have been alone. I've had a multitude of wonderful people around me, encouraging me and walking with me. But sometimes you do feel alone, and an otherworldly presence is pretty special. And then it all culminated in this final piece, which is the birth of a pearl, and it's a diptych. On the left, you see the placenta, and all the spheres represent those experiences in life that all come together, the bad ones and the good ones. They come together in a tenderness like that core, that center heart of the pearl. There's a tenderness, and all of it goes together to nourish the final product, which is hopefully going to be a beautiful pearl. And it may have a bit of a hard exterior, like the image on the right. It may have that about it, those layers, but inside there's always still this beautiful, tender, loving, and gentle part of us that survives even through everything that we may have lost. And so with that, I would just say that, you know, beauty is never lost in despair. Beauty is lasting. So thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Linda. So let's just keep it moving. I would like to introduce Blair Treniman and invite her up here to show her work with us.
Thanks, Lucie. So my PowerPoint should be up already. There we go. The premise behind my work in collaboration with this show, my original exhibition was about the separation that me and my wife are going through due to COVID. So all my work is really about temporariness and fragility. So this first piece here is adjusting. It's a sculptural work that I made using Kleenex and unfired clay. In this work, I used materials that I wanted to transform from their normal state and kind of remake them into something different. So when I used the tissues, I soaked them in a mixture of glue and Mod Podge. So they ended up making this really hard outer core, much like a cast almost. And the clay is this broken splitting material where normally clay would be fired and permanent. And now in this circumstance, it's cracked. as you can see in more in the left-hand side of this image, how the clay turned out. These bust-like sculptures represent me and my wife adjusting to the COVID situation, as she lives in America and I'm here in Canada, so we haven't really been able to see each other, and we'd have to change how we communicate and rely on each other, much like how these materials are communicating with each other. Um, Something that's always been important in our relationship has been being able to be there for each other, even though we are long distance. But since the border closed, we've really had to adjust to that aspect of our relationship, and we've missed parts of things that we've been able to celebrate together, like birthdays, holidays, graduations, things like that, that we can't do anymore. When I was thinking about making this work, I really wanted to use different kinds of materials, but techniques that I've used in the past. So when building this, I used more of a coil building technique that I would use in clay, but using the tissue material to do that. Here's a quick video kind of what they look like in the space and interact with each other. The next work that I have in the lasting exhibition are these small installation figures. They're all mixed media, but mostly made out of unfired clay. And they embody emotions that I've felt over the past few months, such as pain, loneliness, anger, displacement, anxiety, hurt, heartbreak, exhaustion, and stress. This work really focused on my individual feelings about being separated from my wife Sam, instead of kind of how we felt collaboratively. And it helped me kind of get through things by putting my daily emotions into these small figures, and kind of getting that emotion out. Um, I didn't fire them because I didn't want them to be permanent, because referencing this show, it's talking a lot about lasting and what lasts. And I know that this time that we have isn't going to last forever. And that was a big premise in my show, With Time. It was talking about that with time, things are going to change. I'm going to be able to see her again, and that these emotions aren't going to last forever. They're just how I feel in the moment. Here are some detail shots of these figures. And the last work that I have in the lasting exhibition is called Day by Day. It's a sculptural art piece made out of Kleenex that I had printed photos of Sam and I on. This work really focused on fragility and temporariness. And I was trying to show time through the abundance of tissues and the temporariness through how fragile the material is. Because Sam and I have been apart for a really long time now, and I wanted to showcase the abundance of tissues piled up. All the photos are printed of memories that end up kind of becoming like a photo album when they're all together. And I thought that they really portrayed the emotions that I felt throughout this time, and that even though sadness is a really overt emotion displayed in my work, it also showed longing and the want for us to be back together. Here's some more details of how this work looks in the space and details of the photos on the Kleenex. And that's everything for me.
Thank you so much, Blair. I will now invite Melanie Barnett up onto the screen, who is our other three-dimensional artist. Hello, Melanie.
Hello. All right.
Can you maybe move the microphone a little closer to you?
How's that?
Perfect.
All right, so can everyone see the PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, then here we go. So hello, everyone. I'm Melanie Barnett, and I am also a recent graduate from IshKaabatens, Waasa, Inaabateg, Department of Visual Art at Brandon University. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts Honors in Ceramics. And so the works shown in Lasting that are of mine are from my thesis exhibition, Detritus. So detritus in ecology describes non-living organic matter like leaves, animal remains, and feces, all of which they fall into soil or water where they'll be broken down by decomposers. And so I've used this definition to comment on the climate crisis, referencing specifically my own anxieties surrounding the topic. So this work is the first work of mine that you'd see in the community gallery at the AGSM, and it's entitled Playing God. And so throughout the body of work, I've aimed to foreshadow our species, Homo sapiens, fate, amidst a collapsing environment. And so I also have a few short videos just to show the space that these figures take up. So as you can see, these figures are being consumed by mosses, liverworts, and fungi, and they're all of which are ancient organisms. Oops. There we go. Species within these classifications, they've existed essentially unchanged for far longer than humans and far longer than any of us could ever imagine. And so moss and liverworts are both non-vascular plants. They don't have leaves, flowers, seeds, or stems like a flower would. And a flower is an example of a vascular plant. And so if you compared moss and liverworts to, say, a flower or a tree, genetically the moss and liverworts would be closer to the aquatic algae that all land plants evolved from. And so this is what I mean when I describe them as ancient. And so these are two detail images of Playing God. So early on in the development of detritus, I was reading a biology textbook that I have from a course that I took. And I became really interested in a particular species of liverwort, Marcentia polymorpha, or the common liverwort. I found their reproductive cycles really interesting. Not only do they reproduce through spores, but they have these organs called gemma cups. And so here on the right-hand side, the dark grayish green stuff on the figure, those are my sculpted liverworts. And so on top of each leaf-like structure, which is actually called a thallus, are these little cups, and they're called gemma cups. Inside the gemma cups, there are these tiny discs, which are called gemma. And the gemma are little bundles of genetic material. And so when a raindrop splashes onto the liverwort, onto the gemma cup, it dislodges the discs and scatters them away from the mother plant. And so that's how, that's one way that Marcentia polymorpha reproduces. And so I find it really interesting how these plants reproduce, whether it's moss spores or the seeds of a dandelion or gemma cups. The idea of scattering, of spreading, is key to survival for many of these plant species. And I think that while this body of work isn't necessarily about the COVID-19 pandemic, I found that to be a really interesting parallel as I was developing my concept. So I have 4 works in this exhibition, one of which is Ecosphere. It's an organic wall installation that's made up of hundreds of ceramic mushrooms, moss fragments, and liverworts. An ecosphere, by definition, is basically the interaction between a planet's living and non-living components. And with this work, I think that conceptually it becomes a lot stronger when people are able to see it in person. And so it's a little ironic that we are unable to do so. And so while these mushrooms and moss fragments on the wall are reminiscent of living things, they are not alive. They are ceramic, a man-made material, and they were never living organisms, nor will they ever be. The living component here, from the scientific definition of Ecosphere, is the viewer, the people who come into the gallery to see the work. They form the living part of Ecosphere. And going back to ceramic as a man-made material, ceramic is permanent. These works will live a lot longer than I will. They will live for thousands of years. So compared to my lifespan, they're immortal. And so that idea of lasting is really present in my medium choice. And so I have another short video here. So I wanted the gallery to look like it was infested, that the ancient organisms that are consuming the figures are also spreading throughout the gallery. This references the impact that the climate crisis has on our lives today, as well as in the near future. This issue isn't something that we as a species will have to worry about just 1,000 years from now. It will likely become a prevalent issue in my lifetime. So gradually the figures become more distorted. This work here is Remedium, and it is the first work in this series that I made. Everything in this body of work really stemmed from this particular work, from Remedium. This is where I combined an idea that I had about figures with a bunch of holes in them with this fungal growth design. And so in Latin, remedium means to remedy or to restore balance. When I titled this work, I was thinking about what we, not only as people, but as a species, could do to solve our past mistakes, how we can fix this crisis before the environments we live in completely collapse. And so as humans, being the dominant species on the planet, or at least that's what we like to think of ourselves as, there's this train of thought that I'm sure that we're all very familiar with, especially here in the West, that humans are separate from nature, that from other species, because we're the dominant species on the planet. In reality, when we die, our bodies will return to the same cycle that all living organisms adhere to. Our bodies will eventually become detritus. And so that thought leads to the last of my works, which is, which is Slept Within the Soil. So in this work, the decomposition process continues. Here, the figure's entire face and most of their body has been entirely consumed. Their head has fallen into their soil, and their hand is placed on top of their head, as if in a final moment of humanity before they become one with the soil. So that concludes my part of the presentation today. Thank you all for listening. And yeah.
Thanks, Melanie. So finally, we're going to invite Eleni Kilbride up here in order to talk about the selections from her thesis show. Hello, Eleni.
Hello. Right. I think I'm all set up here.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, hi, everybody. I am Eleni Kilbride. I am from Swan Lake First Nation and born and raised here in Brandon. I am a mother to, I'm homeschooling 3 girls right now. They are ages 3, 7, and 13. So my thesis exhibition was originally titled Empowered by Play. And through the process of making it, we did a lot of experimental collaboration. So my first piece here, it's called Kids in the Kitchen. And this piece was one of the first ones I started, and it did not originally look like this. It was all one full piece, and everything from priming the canvas, because my daughters helped me do. And so it's started off with just a canvas, unstretched canvas laying on the floor, a pail of paint, and my 7-year-old, and we really experimented with even how to lay the paint on. She used her hands, she used her feet, she danced on it, she rolled on it. I think ultimately it became kind of an outlet for this whole experience of coping with isolation, because she's 7 years old, and due to some health issues, she's being homeschooled. So yeah, there's been a lot of time away from family, away from friends, teachers, just a typical life for her. It's been very different. So a lot of the work that I've done has looked at how this doesn't only impact me, but how it's impacting my kids. And yeah, this is one piece where I really wanted to give them that opportunity to let it out. And so, yeah, as I said, it started off with Aria, my 7-year-old, but there's a lot of contributions here from Juliet, my 3-year-old, and Libby, my 13-year-old. And I'll go into some details here. So this is a detail that my 13-year-old collaged onto the canvas. Behind it's a lot of mark making done by all of them. This was completed in multiple layers. There's, in this one image, there are puzzle pieces glued on. There's pencil, there's Sharpie markers, there is acrylic paint, alcohol ink, Minko dabber, oil pastel, and even some oil paint. I did, with supervision, allow and teach Aria how to use oil paint here. So yeah, here's another section of it. And on this piece, there is dirt, there is slime. Not only did we use, I guess, more traditional art mediums, we also used some unconventional things here. We made slime on top of this canvas. We laid it on the floor in our kitchen, and we made slime. We, my 3-year-old was really into dirt, so she helped me pot plants on it, and she rubbed the soil all over the canvas, and I let her get muddy. It was the middle of winter. It was -50. She wanted to play in mud, so I let her, because we couldn't go anywhere or see anybody. So that was fun. I think there's even a flower petal and an orange peel in there. And here there are macaroni noodles. And a gum wrapper and some goldfish. Now this part here is really specific to my 3-year-old. She individually glued each noodle on, and each wrapper, everything. It looks like maybe you could have just thrown it on, but you know, it's very specific. This took her probably about an hour, this one section here. Yeah, and if I go back, this is specific really to Aria. She wanted to write that message and have it be in the center of this piece. So yeah, that was that one. And that piece kind of paved the way for the rest of my work. This one too is titled After the Rain. Juliet helped again with the mark making in the background and throughout the piece. It started off as a burnt sienna wash. I think everything but the figure was done in acrylic at first, so that I could layer on materials and paints that were more appropriate to her usage. So there's tempera paint in here and some crayons too. She had a lot of fun being able to use the paintbrush in her fingers and lather the paint on. With this piece too, we didn't used pre-mixed paint for her portion. We had tempera paint that you actually add water to, and so she was able to glob that on. But not just the process is specific to this. This piece is actually kind of about her in the sense that she is epileptic, and as a mother, I've had to learn how to navigate having epileptic children. She's my second daughter with it. And so After the Rain is really specific to after the rain, after a storm, which is something I use to reference epilepsy a lot. There are flowers blossoming, there is puddles to jump in, there's worms, there's all sorts of little things that sometimes you don't notice or appreciate. And that's kind of referencing some of my experience. There's little things about childhood and infancy that maybe I wouldn't have taken so much notice to if I didn't have to worry about them going away ever or stuff. So it's in a way honoring her strength and her resilience as even just a toddler, what she's been through. And so, yeah, moving on to this piece. This is representative of my two daughters, Juliet and Aria. And in this piece, we used acrylic paint, I used oil paint, and we used seeds. The girls helped apply the paint, and I went over it again. There's many layers in this painting as well. And it's really speaking to their connection as sisters, and again, kind of noticing those little things that maybe I wouldn't have noticed if we weren't stuck at home together, how invested they are in each other, how connected they are, and how there's a lot of really beautiful moments in a day that sometimes we miss out on when we're so busy rushing through it. And so this is a piece about how I was forced to really slow down and just embrace these moments with them. And I think how they also embraced it with each other, despite there being some typical cases of sibling rivalry, such as the application of seeds. Yes, that was an issue. Here's a detail shot of that piece and some of those seeds and their placement. And this is titled High Five. It is another oil painting and with acrylic and tempera paint. Much like After the Rain, this was applied with tempera paint that you mix. So basically she high-fived this whole canvas repeatedly. And yeah, from that, the backdrop was done first. And then I painted in the figure. So it was really interesting to do because I had mentioned that the backdrop was done first. And so I had to figure out how to make what I wanted my mark making to be work with her mark making. And in the end, I ended up really happy with it. And I kind of was surprised, to be honest. This was one of the last pieces that I did. And I feel like it kind of depicted what I wanted most to be said, just about how we're learning to work through this all together. And now this piece is titled Falling Friend. It's the last piece I'll be showing here. It's different than the other ones that I've shown because there's no actual mark making from my daughters on it. Instead, it was collaborative in, I think, the concept design, because this piece depicts my daughter, who is now 12 at the time the painting was made, when she was 3 years old. And she is autistic. At the time, she didn't have the vocabulary to tell me what was happening in what this photograph was referencing, her form of playing. So essentially, she would wrap twigs and any type of item she'd find at the park in toilet paper and repeatedly climb up the play structure and throw it down the slide. And I was always so fascinated by the way she played and interacted with these objects and materials. And so years later, she was able to tell me what exactly she was imagining and what was occurring in this play. And so I think the play for her was very meaningful, and it's that meaning that I really wanted to capture in this painting, how, something like an inanimate object has life to it. It's part of her in a sense from the way that she plays with it. So yeah, my original exhibition is really about wanting to honor childhood and look at how I've been, impacted by some of our experiences as a mother, and also thinking about what kind of, lasting effects this leaves on them, considering they're the, future generations coming up. So yeah, that concludes my portion of this exhibition.
All right, thanks so much, Eleni. We're going to bring everybody else back up here. Thank you, all you artists. Before we get to questions, I think that you might have had your convocation yesterday. Is that true?
Yeah.
It's funny, eh? It's a symbol, it's a ritual, but it feels a little different, doesn't it?
It's very different.
I watched it at my kitchen table. I had called my parents and we pressed play at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was convocation for me.
Yeah, we watched it eating cereal on the couch. So
it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Instead of sitting in a polyester robe for 3 hours.
Very early.
Anyway, congratulations. I wish I had
Thank you.
confetti.
Thank you.
So I want to start because this is something that I had been wondering for Melanie as well. Maria Eggleston talks about your work and the juxtaposition of different elements, the smooth and the rough, as well as the concept is intriguing. She would have loved to have seen it in person as well. And that's something that I noticed with your work, Melanie, is that there is this huge mixture of textures that's going on. Can you tell us a little bit about the technical aspects and how it relates to the concept?
Yes. So, it really came about pretty organically. So the way that I build the figures is I use an additive sculpting technique. So I build it as lumps of clay smacked onto these metal bars that I've set up. And then I form the figure around that without any of the detail, just the body. And then I cut it into pieces once it's dried to the right level. And then I hollow out the inside and reattach everything. And all of the decoration, the fungus, the moss, the liverworts, that all comes on after it's been hollowed and reassembled. I've tried doing it where I incorporate some of that detailing beforehand, and it all just falls off. So, you live and you learn. But that contrast between textures. It is 100% there, and it is also I really wish that people could get to see it in person. I find that photos they're so hard to photograph. That's why I included videos. But
I often talk about as a curator, one of the secret treats is that you get to touch art, and you do have this mixture of textures in addition to the clay work. Of the gloss, and you have some spatter in there, and then you have a really matte finish for some of your really vivid colors, which seems almost contradictory.
Yeah. I don't know if I had thought about that texture conceptually. It's just something that happened organically, and I let it happen. But yeah.
There is something very forest floor about it in person. So I hope that, that sometime before June 19th, Maria, you can come and look at it. And can't touch, but I can touch, I can tell you. We have a question from Kate to everybody. She says, several of these works were intensely tied to personal relationships. Do the artists think this will continue, diminish, mutate after isolation ends? Was your work before COVID much different than this work? Why don't we start with Blair?
I did make work about me and Sam before COVID had started. Our relationship has a big impact on the way that I make my art, but it definitely changed the way that I was making art about us because of COVID. So I don't think it'll diminish, but it'll probably change the way that I speak about our relationship and make art about our relationship.
You might start firing your ceramics again.
Maybe.
Yeah. And Linda, you said you were already in a very personal, in a self-reflective space. Let's talk about the birth of the pearl in the context of this question, because it is from almost a decade before you started your thesis work.
Oh yeah, you're referring to the pearl
Right.
essence.
Pearl essence.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that piece. It's relatable because at the time that was made, I was also going through a difficult time, and I was on a road trip to Winnipeg, and it was a very cold winter day, and I saw the most beautiful sundog I'd ever seen. And it was there, that was back in 2011, and it was there that I got the first, I mean, we all know that beauty is around us and helps us, but it was such a, I don't know, really impacted me on that trip, that here is the presence of beauty right there. All we need to do is look at it. And it changed how I was feeling. So it was an external device that changed what was happening inside of me. And so that's why I wanted to include it, because I think that it is part of the whole essence. As for my work before my thesis show, it's always been driven by faith and emotion. And so it's not always so sad. You know, a lot of my work is about the mystery of life. I love the mystery. I love the wonder. I love the way out there things that we don't understand. And I like to try and work it out on the canvas. So, yeah.
And Eleni, obviously your work can't continue to be about your 7-year-old, as she can't stay 7.
Yeah, so I think the dynamics of motherhood are something I'll continue to explore, and sometimes maybe even more on a personal level, issues such pertaining to identity too, and I guess finding yourself, just as you, aside from being a mother. There's stuff there I really want to explore, but prior to COVID, I definitely focused on my children and painting them a lot. I knew my thesis would center around that, and I really wanted my children to look like my children in the paintings for it. So yeah, there was a lot of studying, and there was a lot of playing with concepts, and there's even a lot of just trying to experiment with them, because sometimes they have all their own ideas, and it's hard to kind of get on that same level. So it was definitely an investment to kind of explain this.
And Melanie, yours is less obviously about personal relationships, but I think people would be interested to know that those busts, you actually use yourself as the model for those stretched, bald figures.
Yeah.
Want to answer this question?
So my answer to this question will be quite a bit different. Like, my work is very much about my own anxieties, right, surrounding the climate crisis specifically. And so because of COVID, I had to use myself as the model. I had considered using other people and getting them to send me photo references so that I could incorporate different bodies and make it a little bit more collaborative, because me and Blair were alone in that basement room for months on end. But I found that was very difficult and unreliable. Like, just getting people to actually send the images wasn't always easy. And to get them to send the right images also wasn't easy. So in the end, I decided to use myself and make it very self-reflective. But post-COVID, I think it would be very interesting to continue, not necessarily this body of work, but on a similar tangent, and make it more collaborative. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think a lot of collaboration is going to become, the dream pretty soon. And there's so many tools that have come out of this also that make collaboration so intensely possible, even in geographical distances and all these things. Speaking of collaboration, Eleni, and also because I come from an art education background, and your work would be a perfect art education thesis as well, instead of a BFA. Can you talk to me about the constraints that you had to put on that process in order to create a successful composition?
Yeah, that's actually really, and it's kind of unspoken in a lot of the process and everything, because I wanted to really avoid in the moment telling my kids, don't do this, don't do that, don't put the paint there, make it look more like, I didn't want to have to be controlling them in those moments. So I found that in order to really allow for them to have the freedom to move and make what they wanted, I had to prepare ahead of time. I had to consider the way the environment was even arranged. We had to talk rules ahead of time, such as, if your feet are full of paint, you cannot leave the kitchen and trail all the way up to your bedroom. We stay in these certain parameters, and then I would just lay out the materials that, for my 3-year-old especially, that I'd want her to use. I wouldn't leave my oil paint laying on the ground. I'd put like the tempera paint there. I'd give her the tools to mix it, and then I just stand back, let her do it. Ario's a little different because she's so energetic and excited about everything. Her enthusiasm is just through the roof all the time, which is awesome. She loves everybody and everything. So with her, she would actually make these contracts with me about what she'd want to use. And then I'd have to lay those out, and she would critique even the way I laid out for her. And so she would be rearranging everything and kind of making up her own rules. Like, well, I'll keep this here and you can take this back. And so there was a lot of opportunity, I think, for her to even just express herself in every way. And that's something that I really enjoyed about this process. And then with my oldest, who's not so enthusiastic, she likes to be in her own bubble. So rather than making her come down and participate with the younger girls, she would be all the way up in her room, drawing out, sketching out what she'd want to contribute. And so we'd have to make these compromises and find ways to work with that. And then every once in a while, she'd surprise me by coming down and then just getting all in there too. But a huge part of the process was making some of those constraints clear, but also not too limiting, I think.
Kurt has a follow-up question about if your kids do art on their own time.
Oh, all the time. All the time. I think right now they're actually in the other room drawing, and so they're always sculpting, drawing, painting, doing anything. They like painting rocks, so you might even see some of their rocks hidden around Brandon. So.
We should wrap up pretty soon because we're almost at the hour mark, but I did want to talk to Blair because this is the goal of mounting this exhibition in the community gallery at the AGSM was that people would finally get to see it. And I think that's especially our painters here work at a really large scale. So obviously seeing things in person is important for that, but you can kind of imagine it when you have these physical objects that the sculptors are working on. I think that even more is lost. So seeing Adjusting by Blair, it looks almost like a stalactite, stalagmite kind of thing, but they're very lightweight. It's almost like a plaster of Paris construction. So I was wondering how conscious you were of the weight of them when you were working with this novel material as far as the concept.
Well, the weight of these works are very light if you think of like how heavy a box of tissues is, right? Like that's what they're made of. But as objects, they look quite heavy because they take up so much space. But they actually, you got to see it have kind of a partner work in my original exhibition that was made out of clay, which they are about 4 and 5 feet tall, made out of fired ceramic, and they're very heavy. So there's kind of a juxtaposition from my original exhibition of this work and that work together. And I think without that work, these works kind of take up weight without that piece with them. but physically they are very light objects.
Yeah. I want to tell people who might not know Blair is in Saskatchewan. We couldn't take those big pieces because I didn't want to install them. The nice thing about the gallery being closed is that we didn't have to put those pieces under plastic, which I feel kind of, I don't know, it feels like kind of putting them in an aquarium almost. So they get to be open because they are quite fragile. I want to read a comment from Doug Dirksen. It says, "Great work. Congrats to all. Linda, beauty is a seldom used word or idea in modern art. Nice to see its return in your work. Any thoughts on beauty post-modern art?"
Well, I don't know. It seems to me that art has taken so many forms, and so it can be expressed in so many ways. A lot of art isn't beautiful. It's actually, some art is really not beautiful at all. And that's okay, because the beauty in it comes from the expression of it. And I think that no matter what we produce, it comes from within us, and we are creators. So we're all meant to create in one way or another. So.
Yeah, there's this so many moments in, you know, all of this kind of ancient art history that's so old that you can't even attribute authors to this work, where you just look at objects and you realize that they didn't have to make them beautiful. And that's kind of where you can see this soul entering into those objects, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that we will end there. Congratulations, official graduates.
Thanks.
That's so great.
Thank you.
Best of luck. I'll see you all again, either physically or virtually and constantly, I'm sure. And thank you so much for sharing all of your work with us. I want to tell everybody who's watching that we're going to do a closing reception on June 10th in the evening as well. So you can follow the AGSM's virtual spaces for more information about that. Maria has been very complimentary for absolutely everyone. And so I'll just close with a little love from her. She says, "Congratulations, and what a lovely way to spend an hour." So thank you, Maria. And
Love you, Maria.
Great afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. And we hope to see you back here soon.
Thank you very much, Lucie.
Thank you.
Yeah, great day.